It was supposed to be a warm Christmas morning, but everything changed when my parents uninvited my son from Christmas dinner. They claimed he was too disruptive, but I could tell something else was going on. I was devastated, confused, and then I found out why. A voicemail from my mom revealed the real reason my parents weren't just excluding us from dinner. They were secretly giving away the lake house I had spent 5 years restoring to my sister. It was a betrayal I never saw coming. But before we dive deeper into this story, I have an urgent announcement. Due to some technical issues, we're pivoting to a new channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description and the pinned comment below. Now, back to the story. The phone rang, and I stared at the device on the coffee table. The screen was black and lifeless, almost mocking me as it sat there, just out of reach. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest as I reached for it. For a split second, I thought about letting it go to voicemail. But that would have been cowardly, wouldn't it? So, I swiped the screen and answered. "Hello," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. It was my mom, Susan. "Elizabeth, honey," she started, her voice tight but trying to sound calm. "I need to tell you something." And right there, my stomach dropped. I already knew. I had already felt it in my bones. This dark, oppressive weight that had settled over the morning. I braced myself. "What's going on, Mom?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Listen, we've been thinking," she continued, and there was a hesitation, a pause that made my insides twist. With Natalia bringing Gail for the first time, and you know how sensitive Gail is to noise. "Mom," I interrupted, not wanting to hear the rest. "He's 8. He's excited. He's not a monster." "I know, honey. I know," she replied, her tone softening for a moment. But I could already hear the dismissive edge creeping in. "But this dinner, it's very important for your sister. You know how it is. We need everything to be perfect. And honestly, Leo was a bit loud at Thanksgiving. So, we just thought, well, it might be best if you two stay home this year. We can do a brunch next week. Just us. Just the family." And there it was. The words that shattered the fragile peace I'd been holding onto for the last few months. Just the family. I felt the blood drain from my face, and a coldness washed over me. I could hear Leo's voice in the background, soft and hesitant, asking if we were going to be late. Grandpa James hates it when we're late. I could hear him, clear as day, and the realization hit me like a punch in the gut. This wasn't just about noise, it was something deeper, something I hadn't wanted to admit, but now it was inescapable. "We aren't going, Leo," I said, the words leaving my mouth like lead. I didn't even recognize my own voice as it broke the silence that had enveloped the room. He blinked, his small face furrowing in confusion. "But the presents? And the tart? You made the tart?" "I know, baby. I know." I knelt down in front of him, my knees cracking as I lowered myself to his level. His warm little hands were trembling slightly as I took them in mine. "Grandma called," I said, the lie coming out smoothly, despite the lump that had formed in my throat. "She said there's been a change of plans. They aren't doing the big dinner anymore." Leo's face fell. His eyes, wide and trusting, searched mine for answers. But I couldn't give him the truth. Not yet. "You made the tart," he said again, his voice small, his brow furrowed in confusion. "We're not going—" "No, sweetheart," I whispered, pulling him into a hug. The warmth of his little body against mine felt like the last piece of my heart still beating. I buried my face in his hair, hiding the tears that were threatening to spill. "Not this year." I felt the anger rise, slow and cold, twisting my stomach. How dare they treat him like this? He was just a child. He was full of life and joy, and they had just thrown us aside, for Gail, for their new connection, for the man who had somehow become more important than their own flesh and blood. The anger was almost overwhelming, but I fought it back. I couldn't let Leo see it. Not yet. I had to be strong for him. I had to protect him from the truth, from the reality of what was really happening. So, I forced a smile, the kind of smile I hadn't felt in hours. "How about we make pancakes?" I suggested, my voice bright, fake. "Chocolate chip pancakes, and we can open our presents right now. Just us." He nodded against my shoulder, his little arms wrapping tighter around me, but the bounce was gone from his step. The light that had been in his eyes was dimmed. I could feel it. He knew. He just didn't understand why. "Okay, Mom," he whispered, and for a moment, I wondered if he knew more than he was letting on. We made pancakes. I went through the motions. I played the part of the happy mom, the one who would make the best out of a terrible situation. But every moment felt like a lie. Every smile felt forced. Every word felt hollow. Leo tore open the gifts with the same enthusiasm. But there was something missing. The joy. The pure excitement he usually had on Christmas morning was gone. Instead, there was a shadow behind his laughter. He kept glancing at the door, like he was waiting for someone to burst through, to say that it was all a mistake, that they hadn't really uninvited us. But no one came, no one called, and the silence between us grew. We didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about how my parents had chosen a man they barely knew over their own grandson. We didn't talk about how, in the eyes of my parents, Leo wasn't worth the trouble. We didn't talk about how I had spent the last 5 years of my life restoring that house, my inheritance, only to be told that it wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough. The pancakes were good, at least, but everything else felt wrong. It felt like the world had tilted on its axis, and nothing would ever be the same again. After breakfast, I went to sit on the couch, a cold cup of coffee in my hand. I stared at the Christmas tree, its lights twinkling like little stars mocking me. My phone buzzed intermittently, and I ignored it. I didn't want to see what the world outside my little bubble was doing. I didn't want to see the Merry Christmas messages from people who had no idea what was really going on. I didn't want to explain why I was home alone with my son. I didn't want to have to say, "Oh, just relaxing," when the truth was far more complicated. But eventually, the buzzing stopped. The notification light on my phone blinked. I sighed and picked it up, half expecting more of the same. 3 missed calls, all from Dad. My heart skipped a beat. Had they changed their minds? Did they feel guilty? Was this some sort of half-hearted attempt at reconciliation? Maybe they were calling to apologize. Maybe they were finally going to admit they were wrong. I didn't know what I expected, but I knew I wasn't prepared for what came next. I pressed play on the voicemail, my hands shaking as I lifted the phone to my ear. "Elizabeth?" My dad's voice started, gruff and impatient. pick up the phone. I need to know if you still have that spare key to the cabin in your safe. I can't find the master's set, and we need it." My breath caught in my throat. My heart started pounding in my chest. The cabin. They were talking about the cabin. The cabin I had worked so hard to restore. The one I thought was mine. I felt like I had been hit with a sledgehammer. The rest of the voicemail was muffled, as if he had shoved the phone into his pocket. The sounds of the house, the clinking of silverware on china, a jazz song playing softly in the background. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The voicemail kept playing, and I realized with a sickening jolt what was really happening. They weren't just excluding us from dinner. They weren't just rejecting my son. They were taking the one thing I had poured everything into. The one thing I had thought was mine. They were giving it to my sister. I should have hung up. I should have deleted the voicemail and walked away, but I didn't. I sat there, frozen, as my world shattered around me. And then I heard my mother's voice, distant but clear. "I just feel bad, James. She worked so hard on that place." And I knew. I knew then that everything was a lie. They had sold me out. They were giving away my inheritance, my legacy, for nothing more than their own selfish desires. And they were doing it right under my nose on Christmas Day, while I sat there making pancakes for my son, pretending everything was okay, but it wasn't. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, as my father's voice faded out. My mind was reeling, my stomach churning. The words he had spoken, the casual tone in which he and my mother had planned their betrayal, it was all so cold, so clinical. They were giving away the cabin. The cabin I had spent years of my life rebuilding. The place I had poured my heart and soul into, brick by brick, stone by stone. The very thing my grandfather had left to the family. And they were signing it over to my sister like it was a trinket they no longer needed. A piece of property to be traded for a future with someone who would never understand its value. I wanted to scream, to tear the phone from my ear and throw it across the room, but I didn't. I couldn't. Leo was standing in front of me now, his little face full of confusion. He didn't understand. How could he? He had been so full of life this morning, his bright eyes full of excitement, waiting for the family Christmas gathering. But now he was just waiting. He didn't even know what he was waiting for. My heart broke for him. They hadn't just rejected me, they had rejected him. My son, my sweet, energetic, wonderful son. They had looked at him and seen nothing but a liability, an inconvenience. They had pushed him aside for a man they barely knew. They hadn't even cared to look at him as anything more than a disruption. I knelt down to his level, trying to keep the tears from spilling over. My chest felt tight, like there was a weight pressing against me, suffocating me. "How about we make pancakes, buddy?" I said, forcing a smile that felt so fake. It made my stomach twist. "Chocolate chip pancakes, and we can open presents just us. No one else, just us." He looked up at me, still unsure, but then he nodded. He always nodded. My sweet boy. He wasn't old enough to understand the depth of the hurt. He wasn't old enough to know the weight of the betrayal. But I did. And the more I thought about it, the more I felt the rage boiling inside me. They weren't just rejecting us. They were taking something from me, something that belonged to me. And worse, they were doing it while I was sitting there, pretending to be okay. pretending like everything was fine, like I wasn't feeling the sting of their rejection, like I wasn't broken inside. I didn't know how to be okay. I didn't know how to make things okay for Leo. He didn't deserve any of this. None of it was his fault. He had been so excited about seeing his grandparents, about the big dinner, about the Christmas traditions that had always been so important to us. And now, he was left standing there, just as lost as I was. I wanted to rage against my parents. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to tell them what I really thought of their selfishness. But instead, I grabbed the mixing bowl and began whisking the ingredients for pancakes. The motion was mechanical, my hands moving without thought, as if they were on autopilot. My mind kept circling back to that voicemail, to the way my father had talked about the cabin, the way they had both dismissed my work, my effort, my sacrifice. The cabin had been my life for 5 years. I had spent every weekend there, every spare moment, working to bring it back to life. And now they were giving it away without a second thought. I had worked so hard to make that place a home for my son, a place where we could create memories together, a place where he could learn to walk, to fish, to grow. And they were giving it away like it meant nothing, like it was nothing more than a weekend getaway for my sister and her fiancé. I poured the batter into the pan, the sizzle of it hitting the hot surface, a small comfort in the midst of my emotional storm. But it didn't make it better. Nothing made it better. Not the pancakes, not the presents, not the fake smiles I was forcing. I was burning with anger, and I didn't know how to stop it. My hands trembled as I flipped the pancakes, the edges curling slightly as they browned. I was angry at my parents, angry at the injustice of it all. But most of all, I was angry at myself for believing in them, for trusting them, for thinking they would ever see me as anything more than a tool to be used when it suited them. The tears that had threatened to spill earlier were now dangerously close to breaking through, but I fought them back. Leo didn't need to see me cry. He didn't need to see me break. He needed me to be strong. He needed me to be the mom who made pancakes and smiled and laughed. But how could I do that when everything inside me was shattered? I forced myself to smile again as I handed Leo his plate of pancakes. He looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes. He didn't know what was going on. He didn't know how his grandparents had torn our world apart, how they had chosen someone else over him. He didn't know that they had rejected him just as much as they had rejected me. But I couldn't tell him. I couldn't let him know what was really happening. Not yet. Not until I had a plan. Not until I could fix it. I set the plate in front of him and tried to push down the lump in my throat. He smiled up at me, his face lighting up in a way that made my heart ache. He was so innocent, so pure, and I hated that my parents had done this to him. I hated that they had made him feel like he wasn't worth their time, like he wasn't worth the effort. I wanted to shout at them. I wanted to scream until my throat was raw. But instead, I took a deep breath and sat down beside him. I forced myself to focus on him, on the pancakes, on the small moments we could still salvage from this mess. But inside, the anger was still there. It was burning, and it wasn't going anywhere. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't let them get away with this. I couldn't just sit by and let them take what was mine. I couldn't let them take the cabin. My inheritance, the one thing that had meant everything to me. I couldn't let them make me feel like I was nothing, like I was invisible. I had to fight back, and I would. I didn't care what it took. I wasn't going to let them steal my future. I wasn't going to let them erase everything I had worked for. I wasn't going to let them take my son's legacy. As I sat there, eating pancakes with Leo, my mind was already working. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to let them see me break. I was going to fight. I was going to fight for the cabin. I was going to fight for Leo. And I was going to fight for myself. They hadn't just uninvited us from Christmas dinner. They had uninvited us from their lives. They had made it clear that we didn't matter, but I mattered. Leo mattered. And I wasn't going to let them erase us. Not now. Not ever. I finished my pancakes and pushed the plate aside. I had to do something. I had to make them see what they had done. I had to make them realize that they couldn't just walk all over me. I had to make them pay for their betrayal. I looked over at Leo, his face still bright with excitement. And for the first time that day, I felt something other than anger. I felt a spark of determination, because I wasn't going to let them destroy us. I was going to fight back, and I was going to win. I should have hung up. I should have deleted the voicemail the second I realized it wasn't going to be a simple apology or some lame excuse about why they didn't want us there. But I didn't. I just sat there, frozen, as the voicemail played on. The sound of my father's voice was a familiar one, but something about it in that moment, something in the way he spoke, made my skin crawl. His tone was sharp, impatient, as he addressed something that had clearly been on his mind for a while. Elizabeth, his voice started, gravelly and gruff. Pick up the phone. I need to know if you still have that spare key to the cabin in your safe. I can't find the master set, and we need it. There it was. The cabin. The one thing I had poured my heart into. The one thing I had worked for years to restore. And here was my father, talking about it like it was some random piece of property they could pass around as if it meant nothing. My breath hitched in my throat as I processed the words, and a cold knot formed in my stomach. The cabin, my inheritance, the very property I had spent 5 years of blood, sweat, and tears to bring back from the brink of ruin. And they were acting like it was just another thing to hand over. The way he said it, we need it, was like they had the right to it, like they had any claim over it at all. I could feel my hands tightening around the phone as I listened, each word they spoke sinking deeper into my chest. The anger that had been simmering in me since the phone call with my mother now bubbled up, hotter and sharper. But it wasn't just anger anymore. It was a kind of cold, bone-deep fury. I'm worried she's going to drive up there to check on the pipes like she usually does in January. My mother's voice cut in, distant but clear. She sounded anxious, but it wasn't genuine concern. It was something else, something cold, something that made my heart ache. And in that moment, I knew what was coming. I knew they were talking about me, about how they'd excluded me from Christmas dinner, how they'd rejected my son, and it hit me all at once. It wasn't about noise. It was never about noise. It was about something much worse. It was about money. It was about power. It was about taking what was mine. And that's when the betrayal became clear. She won't, my dad's voice interrupted, a little louder now. as if he was growing frustrated. "I told you I shut that down. She's too sensitive to show her face after I told her not to come today." The words hit me like a slap. They were talking about me. My father had made sure I wouldn't be there, made sure I wouldn't find out what they were really doing. Shut that down. He said it like it was nothing, like I was nothing. I was just something to be hidden away, something to be erased. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to run to their house and confront them right then and there. But I couldn't. I just sat there, hearing them plot their deceit. The coldness in their voices sent a chill through my body. I could hear my father's voice again, now closer to the phone, and his words froze me in place. "Labor is cheap, Susan," he scoffed. "Vision is expensive, and Gail has vision." Gail. I'd heard that name more times than I cared to count in the last few months. My sister's fiancé, the man who had taken over their lives in a way I could never understand. He wasn't even part of the family. Not really. But somehow. He was the one they were willing to throw everything away for. The cabin, the family legacy. Everything I had worked so hard to create, none of it mattered compared to the vision that Gail had. I could feel the bile rise in my throat as I listened to my father dismiss me so casually. It wasn't just the cabin he was giving away. It was my life, my future. He had promised it to me. He had told me over and over again that the cabin would be mine. And now, he was handing it over to a man he barely knew, to my sister, who couldn't care less about it. They had no intention of keeping their word. They had no intention of keeping the promise they made to me. They had already made their decision. Elizabeth was just patching up a rotting corpse of a house. My father's voice continued, and the words stung like a physical blow. Gail and Natalia are going to build something real, something that reflects this family's actual status. I heard the contempt in his voice, and it burned through me. A rotting corpse. That's what he thought of my work. That's what he thought of the cabin. I had poured my heart and soul into that place. I had spent every weekend working on it, using my own money for materials, my own sweat for labor, and my own hands for every stone and every beam. And here he was, belittling it, belittling everything I had done. "We can tell Elizabeth in the spring," my mother added, her voice trailing off, almost as if she was trying to justify it. But I didn't need justifications. I didn't need them to explain their betrayal. I heard everything I needed to hear in that voicemail. I heard how they had been plotting behind my back, how they had been working to shut me out. And then I heard the words that shattered me. "Once the deed is transferred to Natalia's trust, it's done," my father said, his voice suddenly cold and final. "We can tell Elizabeth in the spring. She'll get over it." The weight of those words crashed down on me, and I could barely breathe. I had never felt more worthless. I had never felt so invisible. My father wasn't just cutting me out of the family gathering. He was cutting me out of everything. He was taking my inheritance, my legacy, and giving it away to someone else. Someone who had never earned it. Someone who didn't deserve it. I had worked my ass off to make that cabin into something beautiful, and now they were handing it over like it was a piece of junk they didn't want anymore. The betrayal wasn't just in the fact that they were giving it to my sister. It was in the fact that they didn't even care about the work I had put in. They didn't care about me. I was nothing. Just a means to an end. a tool to be used when it suited them. And the worst part was they thought I didn't know. They thought I wouldn't find out until it was too late. They thought they could keep me in the dark, keep me quiet, and sweep it all under the rug. But I knew now, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I wasn't going to let them destroy everything I had worked for. I listened to the rest of the voicemail in a daze, my mind spinning. The betrayal was worse than I could have ever imagined. They weren't just excluding us. They were stealing from me. They were taking the one thing I had ever truly cared about. The one thing I had built with my own hands. They had turned my life's work into something disposable. And that was a reality I wasn't ready to accept. When the voicemail ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hands, feeling numb. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to process this. All I knew was that I had to stop them. I couldn't let them destroy everything. I had to fight back. And I would. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. No idea what they had done. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The cabin was never supposed to be a family heirloom, not in my father's eyes. To him, it was always just a relic of a time gone by, a crumbling piece of land that he never really cared for. Not the way I did. I still remember the day he first mentioned it when my grandfather passed and the cabin was handed over to the family trust. I was 26, just starting out in my landscaping business, fresh out of college with no idea where life was taking me. But with one thing already clear, that cabin, that rotting mess of wood and stone, was going to be my project. It would be my legacy, my place. My family didn't see it the same way. They saw it as a liability, an eyesore. My father, in particular, couldn't wait to sell it off. He called it a money pit, and he wasn't wrong in some ways. The roof was caving in. The foundation was cracking, and the garden was a jungle of poison ivy and dead oak trees. But I saw what it could be. I saw what it could become. It wasn't just a shack to me. It was the only thing I had left that connected me to my past, to the memories of summers spent with my grandfather. It was the only place I felt truly at home, a sanctuary for me and, eventually, for Leo. The promise my father made to me that I could take charge of the renovation in exchange for eventual ownership felt like an unspoken contract. He shook my hand and said, "You fix it, you keep it, not kiddo. It'll be your legacy." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. And for the next 5 years, I did everything I could to keep that promise. Every weekend, I was there, working on the cabin. I spent my own money on materials, lumber, nails, shingles, stone, and my own time building it back from the ground up. The nights I spent alone on the property, staring at the stars from the new deck I had built, were some of the most peaceful moments I've ever known. I didn't just want to restore the house. I wanted to make it a home for my son. I wanted him to have a place to go to that wasn't just a house. It was a home with memories, with meaning. My father thought I was wasting my time. He never understood the emotional connection I had to that place. To him, it was just another project, just another piece of land he could sell off for a quick profit. He didn't see the potential. He didn't see the future. But I did. The cabin became my life. I worked on it every chance I got. I brought in contractors when necessary. But I did the majority of the work myself. I rebuilt the stone patio by hand, feeling the rough stones under my fingertips as I laid each one down, making sure it was perfect. I installed the French drains to stop the flooding that had ruined the foundation. I restored the original cedar siding and made sure the windows were weatherproofed, so the place would stand the test of time. It wasn't just physical labor, it was emotional investment. It was blood, sweat, and tears. Every stone laid, every nail hammered, every brick placed, each one represented a part of me, a part of my heart that I left in that house. But as much as I poured into that place, as much as I dedicated myself to restoring it, my parents never saw it the way I did. My mother, Susan, was indifferent. She hated the outdoors, hated the roughness of the cabin. She was more comfortable in her sterile, air-conditioned suburban home. She never understood why I wanted to spend so much time there. To her, it was just a relic from a time that had passed. She didn't see the beauty in it. She didn't see the history. She didn't see the memories. And my sister, Natalia, she was the golden child, beautiful, effortless, always the center of attention. She had always been the one who got what she wanted without ever lifting a finger. She was never interested in the cabin, never cared about the work I put into it. The first time she visited, she complained about the mosquitoes, the lack of cell service, the smell of pine. She called it quaint, with a sneer, as if the cabin was beneath her. It wasn't her world, and she made it clear she wasn't interested in it. And my father, he never stood up for me. He never once acknowledged the work I had done, the effort I had put in. To him, it was always about what could be sold, about what could be turned into a profit. He didn't care about the memories I was creating with Leo. He didn't care about what the cabin meant to me. He only cared about the status, about what was valuable in the eyes of others. And when Natalia met Gail, well, that's when everything changed. Suddenly, my parents were all about Gail. They didn't care about me or Leo anymore. The conversations shifted. No one asked about my business or Leo's school. It was all about Gail, about his investments, his penthouse, his fancy suits. And from the moment he entered the picture, it was clear that the dynamic had shifted. James stopped asking about the cabin, stopped asking about the work I was doing. He stopped caring. All he cared about was impressing Gail. All he cared about was making sure Gail felt welcome in the family. And that's when the tension between us grew. They were all too eager to dismiss me and everything I had worked for. They had forgotten about the cabin, the promise they had made to me. They were too busy trying to please Gail, trying to impress him with their wealth, their connections, and their status. I had become invisible to them. The thing was, I had been right all along. The cabin wasn't just some house in the woods, it was a symbol. It was a testament to my hard work, to my ability to create something from nothing. I had done it on my own. I didn't need anyone's help. I had built that place with my own 2 hands, and now it was mine. But my parents couldn't see it that way. They didn't value it the way I did. To them, it was just a money pit, something to be sold, something to be handed over to the next person who could see it as nothing more than a way to make money. They didn't understand the pride I took in the cabin, in its history, in its future. They didn't understand what it meant to me, to Leo. And when I realized that, when I realized how little they valued what I had done, it hit me harder than anything else. They were willing to throw it all away for the sake of pleasing Gail, for the sake of maintaining their image. And that's when the betrayal stung the deepest. It wasn't just about the cabin. It was about me. It was about how they had seen me all along, just a tool to be used, a means to an end. They didn't care about my efforts, my hard work, or the love I had put into that place. They only cared about what looked good, what would impress the people they were trying to impress. And that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. The cabin was never just a house to me. It was never just a property. It was my life. It was my legacy. But to them, it was just another asset to be passed around. Another thing to be sold to the highest bidder. And now they were giving it to Natalia and Gail, two people who never once cared about it the way I did. Two people who would tear it down, rip it apart, and build something that would erase everything I had worked for. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't let that happen. The cabin was mine. It always had been, and I would fight for it. I would fight for the memories it held, for the future it represented. I would fight for the promise my father had made to me, even if he had already forgotten it. The truth hit me like a freight train. As the voicemail finished playing and the weight of my parents' betrayal sank in, something inside me snapped. My mind raced, calculating everything I needed to do. The cabin, the inheritance, everything I had worked for, it was slipping away. And the worst part was, they weren't even pretending it was for me anymore. It wasn't a family asset. It wasn't about shared memories or legacy. It was about the money. It was about the promise my father had made to my sister and her fiancé, one that they were only now telling me about. My sister, Natalia, and Gail, her fiancé, were getting the cabin as a wedding gift. That was it. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a decision that could be fixed with a quick chat. And the deed was already set to be transferred, and they were going to bulldoze it all. The rain garden, the stone patio. Everything I had put my heart into it was all about to be erased to make room for a gleaming glass monstrosity that would satisfy Gail's ego. My stomach churned at the thought. The betrayal wasn't just that they had excluded me, it was that they had made a decision without me. Without consulting me, without considering the work I had done, the blood and sweat I had poured into that place. It was a slap in the face, but it was also a turning point. The injustice of it hit me hard, but in that moment, something else burned within me, something sharper than anger. It was a determination to stop this, to stop them. And I knew how I was going to do it. I had spent years working in the world of contracts and agreements. I knew the ins and outs of legal documents. I knew how to use the system to my advantage. I wasn't about to let them walk all over me, especially not with something I had earned. I wasn't some naive daughter they could manipulate and discard. I had built that cabin from nothing, and I was damn well going to fight for it. I was no longer the daughter who simply accepted whatever came her way. No. Now I was someone who knew exactly what she was doing, and I would use everything at my disposal to stop them. The deed hadn't been signed yet. That was my window of opportunity. I had to act quickly before they could finalize the transfer. But the question was how the answer came to me as I replayed the voicemail, letting the words sink in. My father had been talking about the deed transfer, about how they had already planned everything. He mentioned the notary, Brenda, who would be there to finalize everything. And then I remembered a few years ago, Brenda had been my client. She was the notary I had worked with on several contracts, and she was the one who had helped me with the sensory garden I had designed for her daughter. I knew her. I had a rapport with her. She was someone I could trust. If I could get to her before the signing, I could block it. I could stop the transfer from happening. The question wasn't whether I could convince Brenda. The question was how I was going to get to her, how I was going to make her listen. I had one shot at this, and I had to make it count. I didn't waste time. I knew I needed leverage. I needed something to stop the transfer, something powerful enough to make her hesitate. I didn't have much, but I had something that could tie the whole process up in legal limbo. The cabin wasn't just a family property, it was a business investment. I had put my own money into it, my own labor, and I had an agreement, a verbal contract with my father that the property would be mine once it was restored. That gave me a claim, a legal claim. It wasn't just a matter of the deed being transferred. It was about proving that I had a stake in the property. And I had the receipts to prove it. Every nail, every board, every stone I had, all the proof of my investment. I could file a lien against the property. I could stop the deed transfer by threatening legal action. If I filed the paperwork, it would take months, even years, to resolve. No title company would touch it. No one would be able to sell the property until the legal issues were sorted out. But that wasn't the end of it. I had to get to Brenda. I had to make sure she didn't sign the deed before I could present my claim. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. My lawyer, Sarah, went straight to voicemail. I wasn't looking for legal advice. I didn't need to wait for an answer. I needed Brenda, and I needed her now. I found her number and hesitated only for a moment. If I came at her with panic, if I came at her with emotion, she'd shut me down. I had to stay calm, calculated, professional. I had to approach this like a contractor protecting an asset. I pressed call, my heart racing as the phone rang. "Merry Christmas," Brenda answered, her voice light and cheerful, just like I remembered. I couldn't let her warmth throw me off. "Merry Christmas, Brenda," I said, forcing the calm into my voice. "It's Elizabeth. I know this is a bit unusual, but I understand you have an appointment with my father, James Vance, at 2 p.m. Today." There was a pause, and I could feel her hesitation. "Elizabeth? You know I can't discuss client schedules. That's confidential," she replied, her voice polite but firm. I didn't have time for pleasantries. "I know," I said quickly. "I'm not asking for details. I'm giving you formal notice. I'm in a legal dispute regarding the property at 44 Lakeview Drive. I've invested substantial capital and labor into that property under a verbal contract of ownership. If the deed transfer goes through today, it will be fraudulent conveyance." I could hear her pause on the other end. The silence stretched out for a beat too long, and then her voice returned, slower now, more cautious. "Are you telling me there is a lien on the property?" she asked, her tone wary. "Not yet," I said, taking a deep breath. "But I can file one the moment the courts open. If you notarize that deed today, knowing that there is an active dispute regarding the property's ownership, you could be deposed in the lawsuit that follows. I'm sure you don't want to get dragged into that, Brenda." There was another long pause, and then the sound of paper rustling in the background. I had her. I knew I did. "I see," she said, her voice cool now, professional. "I can't just skip the appointment. Elizabeth, I'm 5 minutes away from your parents' house, and I can't walk away from a scheduled signing." "Don't skip it," I said quickly. Just be thorough. Ask for the full history of the property improvements. Make sure there are no outstanding claims. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Just don't let them sign anything until I arrive. I could hear her take a deep breath. Considering, if you're there and you're contesting the validity of the title transfer, I'll have to pause the proceedings, she said, her voice steady now, a little more than just businesslike. I'll see you in 10, I said, my voice a low whisper of determination. And just like that, I had a chance. I had my shot. Now I had to make it count. The moment I stepped through the door, I knew everything had changed. The familiar scent of Christmas pine, rosemary, and cinnamon hit me immediately. The house was as pristine as always, but everything inside felt like a lie. The wreaths on the doors, the lights dangling from the gutters, the fake cheerfulness that had always masked what lay beneath. It was all a facade. I didn't ring the doorbell. I still had my key. The door opened with a quiet creak, the warmth of the house almost unbearable compared to the cold of the day outside. I wasn't here for a holiday reunion or to exchange pleasantries. I was here to stop something that had been set in motion long before today. I walked through the house, my boots clicking against the marble floors, the familiar sounds of my parents' lives drifting from the dining room. They were talking, but the words were muffled. As I rounded the corner, I saw them, the familiar, tense scene of my father sitting at the head of the table, papers spread in front of him. My mother stood behind him, clutching her glass of wine. Natalia sat next to Gail, who had the same arrogant look on his face that he always did. It was clear they were all preparing for something. A celebration, maybe, or the final steps in what they believed was a done deal. The moment they saw me, the room froze. My father's eyes widened, his hand halting mid-air. He had been about to sign the deed, his gold pen poised, but when he saw me, everything stopped. The tension was palpable. "Elizabeth," my father said, his voice low, edged with disbelief. My mother's hand flew to her neck, and Natalia didn't even look up from her phone at first. She was absorbed in whatever world existed in that tiny screen. Her life seemingly far removed from the chaos in the room. But that was about to change. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I simply walked toward the table, my eyes never leaving my father's face. He opened his mouth to speak again, but I didn't give him the chance. "I think we skipped a step," I said calmly, my voice steady but cutting through the tension in the room. My words hung in the air like a challenge. My father's face turned from shock to anger. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was flushed with rage, and I could feel the heat of it from across the table. "What the hell are you doing here?" he growled. "I told you not to come. You're not wanted here. Elizabeth, get out." His voice was heavy, his anger seeping into every word. I held my ground, my posture straight, my hands at my sides. I wasn't scared. Not anymore. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "I'm here to stop you." My mother gasped. Her hand flew to her pearls like she was trying to protect herself from the truth, from the consequences of what was about to unfold. "Elizabeth, please," she started, her voice trembling. "This isn't the time. You shouldn't be here." But it was too late. I had already stepped into the lion's den, and there was no turning back now. What is this? Natalia finally looked up from her phone, her expression irritated, as if I were the one causing the disruption. She didn't know what was really going on. She didn't know the depth of the betrayal that had been going on behind my back. She didn't know the lies my parents had told. "Oh my God, Liz," she said with a dramatic roll of her eyes. "You're being so dramatic. We're just having a business meeting here. No need to make a scene." She sounded bored, disinterested, as if this was all just some trivial family drama. "This is not just a business meeting, Natalia," I said, my voice cool, measured. "This is theft, and I'm here to stop it." Gale, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "Who is this?" he asked, eyeing me with disdain. "The sister, the gardener." His eyes flicked dismissively over me, and I felt the urge to lash out, but I held it in. This wasn't about him. This was about something much bigger. "I'm the reason that property is worth anything at all," I said, locking eyes with him, my voice steady. "And I'm the reason you're not signing those papers today." The silence in the room was thick, suffocating. The weight of my words hung in the air, and I could see the realization begin to sink in for my father, for my mother, for Natalia. They hadn't expected me to show up. They hadn't expected me to fight back. "You don't know what you're talking about," my father spat, his face red with fury. He started to walk around the table, his finger pointed at me, but I didn't back down. "You've embarrassed yourself enough," he growled. "You're embarrassing this family." But his words didn't scare me anymore. I was done being scared of them. I slammed the folder I was holding down onto the table with force, the sound of it echoing through the room. I was done being dismissed. I was done being the obedient daughter who just took whatever scraps they threw at me. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. "I think it's you who's embarrassing yourself," I said quietly, my voice calm but full of conviction. My father's expression faltered for just a second, and in that brief moment, I knew I had him. The rest of the room was frozen in place, waiting for something to break. The tension was unbearable. "Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be," I said, turning my attention to Brenda, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding scene. "Brenda," I said, my tone softer now, "has my father disclosed to you that the property in question is subject to a constructive trust based on a verbal contract I have with him?" Brenda looked from my father to me, the unease on her face clear. She opened her mouth to speak, but my father cut her off. "There is no dispute," he snapped, his voice full of contempt. "I own the deed. My name is on the title. I can do whatever I want with it." His words stung, but I wasn't going to let him dictate the narrative. "You promised it to me," I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through the chaos. 5 years, Dad. 5 years of my time, my money, my sweat. I worked for that cabin. You promised it to me. I pulled out the receipts, one by one, and began spreading them across the table in front of him. "Here. This is the $30,000 worth of structural lumber I bought, the $12,000 for the new septic system, the stone patio I built with my own hands, everything I put into that property, into the house you're now trying to sell. I could feel the heat rising in my chest as I placed each receipt down. "You don't get to pretend this doesn't matter," I said, my voice quiet but full of anger. "This isn't just a piece of land. This is my work. This is my legacy, and you don't get to take it from me." My father's face twisted with frustration, and I could see him struggling to find a way to make this all go away. But it was too late. The truth was out. "How much?" Gail finally asked, looking up from the receipts with a bored expression. He flicked one of them away like it was trash. "How much do you need to make this go away? What's the price?" "It's not about money," I said, my voice cold. "This isn't about money. It's about everything you've stolen from me." My eyes turned to my mother. "You knew, didn't you? You knew what they were planning, and you didn't say anything. You let them lie to me." Susan's face went pale, and she stammered, trying to find her words. But the damage had already been done. She knew what was happening, and she had been complicit. I could feel my anger shifting. The betrayal wasn't just about my father, it was about my mother too. It was about the fact that they had both allowed this to happen. They had both allowed me to be erased, but not anymore. I turned back to Brenda, my eyes focused and calm. "Brenda," I said, "I need you to look at these receipts. Look at the history of this property, and don't let them sign that deed today." Brenda was quiet for a moment, her eyes scanning the documents in front of her. She then turned to my father, her voice professional but firm. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance, but with these receipts and this verbal claim of ownership, I can't proceed with this transaction today. I'm going to have to recuse myself." The silence in the room was deafening. My father's face went ashen, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't believe what had just happened. He looked from Brenda to me, and I could see the realization finally sinking in. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice low, but he knew he had lost. Gail stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," he said, his calm demeanor cracking. "We don't have time for this. I'll have my lawyers handle it." But it was too late. The deal was dead. The cabin was mine. As I walked out of the house, the weight of the deed in my hand felt heavier than I ever imagined it would. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was everything. My years of hard work, my sacrifice, my fight. I had fought for this, and I had won. The cabin was finally mine. I didn't need my father's approval anymore. I didn't need my mother's validation. All I needed was the cabin, the place I had rebuilt from the ground up, the place that would always be a symbol of my strength and resilience. Leo was waiting in the car, his eyes bright with curiosity, and when I got in, I didn't have to say a word. He just knew. I didn't need to explain. He looked at me, his face full of hope, and I smiled, feeling for the first time in days like I could breathe again. "We did it, Mom?" he asked, his voice small but high full of excitement. "Yeah, buddy," I said, my heart swelling with pride. "We did it. We didn't go back to the house for dinner. Instead, we found a little 24-hour diner on the highway, and we ate waffles and bacon, laughing until our sides hurt. It wasn't the perfect Christmas my parents had planned, but it was ours. It was real." In the weeks that followed, I heard through the grapevine that Gail tried to sue my father for a breach of contract. It didn't take long for everyone to realize that his LLC was a shell, a way to shield himself from any responsibility. No lawyer would take the case, and Gail quickly vanished back into the city, looking for the next family to leech off of. As for Natalia, well, she started to understand the consequences of being the golden child. We texted occasionally, and I could tell she was finally starting to see that living in the shadow of others' expectations wasn't the prize she had always thought it was. It was a cage. My parents, they had been forced to face the consequences of their actions. They may have looked at the cabin with a mix of shame and respect, but they knew they had almost lost me. They had almost lost their daughter, the one who had built that place with her bare hands, the one they had tried to push aside, but not anymore. And every time they looked at the deed, every time they saw that property, they would be reminded that some things can't be bought and some loyalty can't be sold. I knew that, and now they did too. I had learned a hard lesson, but in the end, it was worth it. I had taken back what was mine, and the best part, I still had Leo by my side, and now we had a future in a place that was truly ours. Thanks for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love for you to stay along for the ride. Until next time, take care.